Good morning to all of you here at USIP and online. We're here today for an event called The Day After Conflict, Women's Meaningful Participation in Post-War Ukraine. It seems actually a fitting day as many in Europe and certainly here in the United States mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day, when another group of citizens of their country and our own here came together in an enormously courageous, united, and a commitment to peace to make a difference for the free world. Today we will be hearing from 3 Ukrainian women talking about that same kind of courage and commitment to the day after conflict. It is a critical moment, as we will soon hear from our own Ambassador William Taylor, who here at the U.S. Institute of Peace is the Vice President for the Center for Russia and Europe. For many, Bill Taylor probably needs no introduction, but I will just remark that he was the former ambassador to Ukraine, 2006 to 2009. He has served the U.S. in many different capacities, and he is a friend to Ukraine. We're very honored to have Bill as a part of the U.S. team and the USIP family. Bill, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Kathleen, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you today and be with these brave Ukrainians. Kathleen's exactly right to remember that on June 6, 1944, the D-Day that we remember every year, in particular on this 80th anniversary, we remember this. And Kathleen's right also to point out the parallels, the similarities. I mean, in 1944, there was a genocidal dictator trying to take over Europe, who indeed had already invaded and occupied a large part of Europe. And there was a push on June 6, 1944, to start to push him back and to push Hitler back. And now, today, Ukrainians are facing a similar challenge. They're facing another dictator who has invaded Ukraine, has invaded its neighbor, and threatens to invade further. And as Kathleen said, brave Ukrainians are fighting, men and women are fighting to stop Vladimir Putin before he can go further. Indeed, fighting Vladimir Putin to try to push him back out of Ukraine. And that's going on as we speak. That's exactly what Kathleen's exactly right, to remind us of the courage of those men and women. And it's not just the soldiers. It's all Ukrainians, men and women, old and young, across the country, on the front lines, in the back lines. We'll talk about some of the different parts of the country here today, parts of Ukraine. This is a national, this is a civilizational challenge that the Ukrainians are fighting for themselves, but they're fighting for us. They're fighting for Europeans. Just like in 1944, the Ukrainians today are fighting for values. They're fighting for democratic values. They're fighting for their own country, of course, and they're fighting for the independence of Europe. There's a lot on stake. We're talking today about the day after. In about 10 days, the Ukrainian government with the Swiss government is talking about the day after. There's a peace summit in Switzerland in 10 days that more than 100 nations are sending delegations to. We are sending our Vice President Harris is going to be there representing the United States, and G7 nations are sending their leaders to talk about what a just and lasting peace means, what a just and lasting peace will look like in terms of nuclear safety, in terms of food security, in terms of humanitarian, in terms of return of prisoners of war, terms of return of children, of Ukrainian children who have been taken into Russia. This is the just and lasting peace that we'll be talking about in Switzerland, that we'll be talking about today. So I'm very pleased and honored to be able to be here with these brave people that are going to talk to us about what they've been doing and how they're looking for the day after, and what we can do as Americans. We can support them, and we've done that, and we're going to continue to do that. So, Kathleen, thank you very much for letting me be here. Congratulations to all of you.
Thank you, Bill, and it's always good to, I feel like your inspiration to all of us to keep speaking the truth to all the power here. So thank you. Another person who speaks truth to power every day is joining us through a pre-recorded message. Oleksandra Matviichuk is the president of the Center for Civil Liberties. Her organization was awarded the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. She is a Ukrainian human rights defender, and she shares with us now a message.
My name is Oleksandra Matviichuk. I'm a human rights lawyer, and this is a huge honor for me to address to this distinguished audience. When large-scale war started, we united our efforts with dozens of organizations from different regions. We built a national network of local documentators and covered the whole country, including the occupied territories. Working together, only for 2 years of this large-scale war, we jointly documented more than 72,000 episodes of war crimes. And 72,000, it's an enormous amount, but still just a tip of iceberg, because Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia attempts to break people's resistance and occupy the country by inflicting the immense pain on civilian population. And that is why, among episodes which we have documented, there are a lot of crimes against women and children. But I don't want to create impression that women just victims of Russian aggression. I know enormous amount of fantastic women in different fields of society. Women joined Ukraine armed forces. Women coordinate huge civil initiative. Women document war crimes. Women take important political decisions. Women are in the forefront of this battle for freedom and democracy, because bravery has no gender and ordinary people can do extraordinary things. To be honest, we have no idea. Either we are in the end of this war, in the middle of this war, or just in the beginning of this war. This means that we have no luxury to postpone important tasks after the war period. We have to continue democratic reforms in the country. We have to start recovering now and to return breath to local communities. And we have to ensure a role of women in all these processes. It's difficult and ambitious goals, but we are fighting for freedom, which is one of the highest value, and freedom is worth it.
Thank you so much for those important words. Indeed, courage and bravery has no gender. Over the next few minutes, you're going to hear what that courage and bravery looks like and feels like. I'm now going to turn to our esteemed panelists. One at a time, I will introduce them to you. And I'm going to begin this morning with Irina Drobovich. She is a USIP visiting fellow and a recent Hubert Humphrey Fellow from the Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. She is a civil society leader in Ukraine, and she is really the engine that brought this meeting together today. She came with the agenda. What is the day after? How can we meaningfully make a difference as women? Irina, can you just help us set the scene? Because though war is all around us, sometimes we forget about that moment when we realize war is our future. Can you tell us what happened on that morning in 2022? Where were you? What was your realization of the war?
Thank you, Kathleen, for this question. Thank you for moderating. Thank you, Ambassador, for being with us. Thank you for all of you for sharing this moment with us. Back on February 24th, no, I will start the week before February 24th. I went to my parents, who live in Western Ukraine. I went there with my, that time, 3-old-year son. What could be better during the winter break for 3 years old than to be treated by the grandparents? It was just a good moment to share it with the family. But in the morning, early morning of February 24th, my husband called me and told that the war has started. And that was the moment when I was so scared as never before. I was lying on my bed under the blanket, and I was so scared because all the grounds of my life have been destroyed. Everything I have built before was gone. In the next moment, my son, who was sleeping next to me, just turned on other back and hugged me. And that was the moment when I came calm. In the next few minutes, my parents came to the room, who were also frustrated. And that was exactly the moment you are asking about. In that moment, I understand that I'm responsible for this family. Since my husband decided to go to the war to defend the country, I found myself as the one who have taken responsibility about myself, about my son, about my parents, about my father-in-law. And there was a moment I understood that our generation is a generation of war. And we have to face these challenges of the war, to do our best and to win this war.
Tell me a little bit how you transformed that moment into your current life and began to think about the day after conflict.
Actually, in the evening of that day, I found myself writing to the women's organizations all over the world, telling them our story, what's going on. We have, together with Ukrainian Women's Congress, I used to advise that time, we reached out to women's movements in Europe, in United States. And they listened to our stories. And that gave me this feeling of transforming my fear into action. And that actually what has happened and what is happening with the women in Ukraine who are so active in all the spheres of society. As you may know, more than 60,000 of Ukrainian women are in the armed forces. 5,000 of them are on the battlefield. They are also scared maybe, but they transform their fear into action. As you know, 56% of the newly established businesses during the large-scale war are running by women. They are contributing to the war economy. They are active. As you also may know, also 56% of Ukrainian women who have fled the country are ready to be back home. and to contribute their skills for rebuilding the country. So that's what is happening. But what I would say here, so far, it is not enough. Now, it is not enough. Here I will also quote the Ukrainian writer who is currently on the battlefield. And he says that about the experience of the war, I want to forget it all, but I won't never forget it. That means that all the experience that Ukrainian women got during the large-scale war should be not forget and should be reflected well and transformed into action.
I'm going to come back to you on some of these details. Thank you so much, Irina. I'm now going to ask Anna Nikolenko to talk about her moment of when she recognized that the war was on the edge of changing her life, and how you decided to join a national effort in Ukraine, preparing your country for sustainable peace.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would like to thank you for providing this safe environment for us to speak and for readiness to hear our voices. It's still very overwhelming to recall that very moment. We realized that the life is not going to be the same again. So first of all, I would like to mention that I'm from a very small city. It calls Kupiansk, and it's in Kharkiv region. And our house is located to Russian border as close as, I don't know, Arlington. So it's literally 10 kilometers. By the time the full war invasion started, I was actually in Poland, and I was very skeptical about this will happen in real life. So I was actually on my research. I was doing research on security, and every day we checked the footages of what is going on the Russian-Ukrainian border, and still I was very skeptical. And what I did, I bought a plane ticket for 23rd of February to visit my family back in Ukraine. And I also bought a train ticket to Kupiansk, and I was supposed to travel 10 in the morning on 24th of February. So, well, I was very optimistic. I encouraged all my friends to keep on going with their plans. And then I landed on the 23rd of February to Juliana Airport, and probably that was one of the last flights which was operated by that airport. And the time I stepped out of this airport, I felt that something is different in the air. You cannot explain it. It's invisible, but it's like a heavy pressure which is invisible. No one is talking about it. Everyone is keep going with the life, but you can feel this tension. And I was intended to spend that one night in Kyiv, and I remember I was staying with my friends, and it was around 5 in the morning, and I heard, I did not sleep because you could not sleep, and I heard that they're also not sleeping, and yeah, at one moment we just realized that probably it has begun, and you cannot explain it. It's just like really a third feeling that something is going on. And this moment we turned on the phones, we turned on the TV, and we saw a dozen of messages. I saw the dozens of messages from my family who is in Kharkiv, who is in Kupiansk, about the real war is going on. And so till now I have this unused train ticket to Kupiansk, which unfortunately I'm not sure when I will be able to use, because the my city, it was under the occupation for the 9 months, and till now it's a real battlefield, and it's closed for entrance, and really for the next few weeks, I was thinking only about one thing: how my family can get out of there. And this is all our efforts were built around. So we did not we did not hesitate of what should we do. We just start immediately supporting on our level whatever we can do, how we can facilitate other people, our friends, just to take them to the safe place.
How is it that your research that you were actually doing on NATO gender norms and security, how is that figured into your work now?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic because just before our panel, I shared this. My perspective was totally changing because when I started my research, it was, of course, we had ongoing war already, and we had, as an organization, also a lot of issues, a lot of challenges to bring the need of our female veterans, of the women who was joining the armed forces. We had this challenge to bring their voices, to advocate for them, and actually to bring their needs to the legislative levels and to have it incorporated. So my idea was that we will take a look at the experience of other NATO countries and we will implement it in our legislation. But then after the full scale invasion, my mind was just flipped, and now I can see that actually we are the source which could be used as a best scenario, as a best example. This is unfortunate to say, but through this experience, we can actually help other countries to achieve gender equality and also to get the idea of how to implement gender standards on some real-based scenario.
Yeah, that is a challenging and admirable effort you're engaging in, and we want to hear more about it in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Angelika Belova, you are working with some of the most vulnerable groups in Ukraine. You bring a lot of experience, including working with the United Nations Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. You have worked specifically with displaced Roma. Can you also share with us, you're from southern Ukraine, what was that day like for you when you realized war was going to be your future?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for having us here. This is a really big opportunity for us to raise our voices, and I appreciated organizers. I appreciated Irina, whose leadership helps different vulnerable groups of women to raise an important issues and their problems and needs and address to international auditory. The week before the war, I spent with my daughter in the hospital, and I was with her like for a whole time. Beside that, I was in the informational circle when we were being prepared for the war and for the invasion, because there is a lot of news that we have to be prepared, and a lot of different news like it will not happen, but we have to prepare. So, and I felt like my mother instinct, especially in this hospital with daughter, it was on high level. And day before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we left the hospital. I went to the mall with my husband, and I started to buy everything to prepare an emergency backpack. It was a lot of information on the internet, what should be included in this backpack. So it was candles, different bars, energy bars, nuts, and also I printed all the documents identified for me and for my husband. And then in the morning we woke up because of explosions and fighters flying over our houses. And on the same day, we left my hometown, Zaporizhia. I'm from Zaporizhia originally. Maybe you know the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which currently occupied by Russians. So this power plant in Enerhodar in Zaporizhia region. But I'm originally from the city, which currently is under Ukrainian control. It was a really hard decision, but I had the same feeling, as Irina said, my responsibility. And the first priority for me was a safeness of my daughter. So we left with this backpack, actually, and we were on the way to the border with Hungary for almost 3 days because it was a lot of traffic jams. My husband decided to return to Zaporizhia and help civilians, our country, as much as he could. And my daughter and I went to Budapest. But from the first day of my stay in Budapest, I thought about, I am in the safeness. Yes, my family, my daughter in safeness, but what about my community in Zaporizhia, in different regions in Ukraine? And I started just to use my skills because I worked in project management for a long time, and I just started to write different grants to support Roma community and vulnerable groups in Ukraine. And my husband on the ground implemented all these projects and helped to vulnerable groups of people. But I will tell more about my returning back in Ukraine in September 2022, actually, and about our work. Thank you.
I just want to let the audience know that I asked in advance permission to ask about these personal stories, in part to illustrate these are real women with real everyday concerns and how they have balanced their accountability to family, to community, to country, and applied their skills so brilliantly, and to their credit, their courage, and their bravery. We're going to talk more about how they are doing that, but I now want to turn to our own expert on Russia, Ukraine. Mary Glantz is our acting director of the Russia and Europe Center. She has had a distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service. She is the go-to person in Washington for so much about the region, and not just the recent past, but her own book, FDR and the Soviet Union, The President's Battles Over Foreign Policy, really gives a deep look and understanding of the relationship of the United States and this region. Mary, help us set some of the context for this war, but also how, in your work here at USIP, are you addressing some of these concerns through efforts? Thanks very much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think Ambassador Taylor has done a good job explaining the start of the war. And these women have done an outstanding job explaining what it was like on the start of the full-scale invasion. Of course, the war didn't begin in 2022. It began in 2014 when Russia took over Crimea, annexed Crimea, and then basically incited and supported with secret troops the fighting in the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. So Russia's been picking at Ukraine and fighting at it and attacking it for over a decade. And that's the context. That's part of why I imagine you understood the seriousness of this and the need to prepare for it. So that gets to what USIP's been doing. Our center has actually been working in Ukraine before this. We worked to try and resolve some of the difficulties. Part of the myths that Putin was using in justifying the initial war was this myth that there are two different Ukraines, Russian-speaking Ukraine and Ukrainian-speaking Ukraine, and that this was somehow a civil war, which it is not. It was not. This was an insurrection. This was led by Putin. It was Russia trying to undermine Ukraine. But he had this myth. And so we worked with the populations in this region and helped them talk to each other and work together and to show that this isn't really about Ukraine versus Ukraine. This is Russia invading Ukraine. We pivoted after the full-scale invasion and began to work on what Ambassador Taylor has outlined as our key focus, which is to guarantee a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. And that means tackling the problems that have emerged in that country and will emerge as a result of what Russia's doing. The difficulties with people who've been IDPs, who've had to leave their homes for years now, and resettle, and how this leads to social conflict. And social conflict is what Russia gets at with their hybrid warfare, with their information warfare. Putin likes to get in and stir conflict in areas by using propaganda and other techniques, social media, things like that, just to create hostility and to ensure instability and violence. So we're focused on increasing social cohesion in order to ensure that that's not there, that this can be a sustainable peace, that somebody like Putin can't come in and manipulate it and ruin it. It'll come as no surprise to you, having heard the stories from these women, that we quickly realized as we made this pivot that the tools for doing this are already there in Ukraine, that what we need to do is support the Ukrainians who are doing this work. And so we launched some initiatives. Our center launched an initiative to help facilitate those people who are going around Ukraine and working on dialogue and working on tackling local issues throughout the country. So we're supporting them in doing that work. Other parts of USIP are doing similar work in different areas, ranging from the work that we're doing here on women, peace, and security. We have a religion team that is working on the dialogue amongst the different religious groups in Ukraine, because that's something that Putin has been exploiting as well. And we have a team that's working on the security sector and justice to help the Ukrainians who are working on reforming these things do it. But the key here, and I think it's obvious, is Ukrainians are incredible at doing this work. They're motivated, they're skilled, they have long experience. And we just need to be able to support them, and so that's what we're trying to do.
So well said, Mary, and appreciate that long-term and short-term perspective of how we're engaged in this work. I'm going to return to our panelists from Ukraine and just ask you again, tell us more details about this day after. Irina, you've been here in the United States for almost 9 months. I think it's also important to acknowledge the role of fellowships in helping to bring our countries closer together. So could you speak to both your day after plan and your fellowship effort?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this question and for this opportunity to reflect also with all of you about the life-changing experience that I really got during this 9 months being a Humphrey Fellow. First at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, where I expanded my knowledges in international development, public policy, gender equality. But also I met the group of fantastic people. One of them is supporting me here from the audience. We were 12 people from 11 countries. And that's how the world comes to you. And then that is the way how you see yourself and your country in the global context. And you see, in the end of the day, like in 2 days I will be back home. And now I see how we all are interdependent, how it matters to tell our stories to the whole world, but also to look at the experience of, to my interest, of the women's movement in different countries. During the fellowship here at the USIP, I got extremely important knowledge about women's movement in Yemen, in Sudan, in Rwanda, about the reconciliation efforts in Europe. All of that would help me to make difference at home. And that's the role of the fellowship that I would tell about, praise as the changing moment for my whole life. But also in terms of what should be done as a women's movement, I will start with the message that without women, Ukraine will never stand so long and so strong. But again, it is not enough, and the women's movement, to my mind, should lean on three main tasks. First, women should be more united. The women's movement, it's very important for us to network, to talk to each other, to share our experience, to make this connections to our dots where we are working together. That brings us that the power with is more strong than the power over. The second point, that women should be educated. Actually, we know in our areas what we are doing. We are expert there, but we have never built peace in our country. We have never made reconciliation efforts, and we should be prepared for that. We should be well educated, and it is not too early to start being educated. So we should do it right now. All the workshops, fellowships again, field missions. That would be very much helpful for Ukrainian women just to get this knowledge and to bring back home. And the last but not least is strong advocacy. What we are doing right now and what we will be doing just to tell the stories to the world, just to tell the truth about the war, just to tell about us making difference during the war. And telling these stories will also change the narrative, what Mary just told about, and change the narrative and provide the evidence that women, in the end of the day, should be meaningfully participated in preparing for peace, in building peace, and in negotiation as soon as Ukraine wins.
Thank you so much, Irina. Indeed, your 3 points are strongly noted, and indeed, power with is more powerful than the power over. So I'm going to quote you on that. Anna, tell us about some of the challenges that lie ahead for the day after, and also some of the opportunities in your work.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of challenges which could be turned into the opportunities, and also the opportunities we already see, but we need to work hard to encourage and to support our women of taking these opportunities. I will start with the fact that I represent an organization which calls Ukrainian Women Congress. This is a small team of female leaders which unites a large group of women by providing them a platform to speak, to deliver their needs to the local government, but also to the national government. So we consider it to be the advocacy platform, and we believe that one of the opportunities we can give as the NGO is to link these women, to give them power to speak and to voice them in front of the decision makers to make a difference. And of course, from another side, to make sure that these women, they're a part of this decision making. And I would say that some challenges that we already experienced, like as you can imagine, any conflict, it changes the gender roles. So this is what also happened, and our society is not an exception in that. So a lot of women, they actually found themselves and discovered they have huge leadership potential. And after the full-scale invasion, they of course changed their role on a family level. So a lot of a lot of women, they just had to become a single caregiver to their underminer kids, to their elder parents, and of course then the men were on the battlefield. They should take care of the security of their family. And I'm not talking about the women who took this courage to join the armed forces and actually to be on the battlefield, because probably all of you heard about this statistic and about the number of actually female who are in armed forces of Ukraine, which is almost 65,000 of women. This is enormous leadership in volunteering. So we have even a lot of jokes about the just tell the volunteer that you need a unicorn and it will be the next morning delivered. And this is really what also united our society. But with that, with this huge leadership potential, still we see that not all of these female, they have a real access to decision making. And I think this is one of the biggest challenge for us, to provide them opportunity to access this decision making on a local level, on the level of their community, and of course to influence the national politics, the government. And the second point, I would like to refer to Irina's comment about it's not enough. I think this is a totally part of our mentality. It's not enough, we are doing not enough, we are not giving enough effort. But I think one of the job of our women community and female leaders is to actually to explain to all these women that they already done so much, that it's already enough for them to be acknowledged, to be heard, to be visible on every level. And again, I will repeat, to be included in this decision making process. So this is also, I think, one of the main challenge of ours, to explain to women that their investment in this war, in this victory, it's just as equal at any level they've been doing. Even if they were taking care of their families, they were taking their kids abroad, those who were on the battlefield, those who were working on the legislation, these are all the equally big input they've done to our victory and to the preparing for our resilience and secure future. And of course, talking about the day after, I can say that we don't need to wait until the day after. What we're all doing, this is already a part of building of secure future, and this is something we as female leaders also need to explain to the community, explain to our society, and to make sure that the voices of our other female leaders are heard, they're visible, and what they're doing, it's already the part of peacemaking. So on every level. So even if, for example, a lot of women, they had to leave the country and they now coexist in these foreign communities and they interact with this community, we need to understand that this is also peacemaking. It's not like we really need to talk only to our opponent. It's work on many levels, and this is also a huge work, and it's already ongoing. And maybe the last but not least, the challenge, we need to acknowledge that we need to bring all this advocacy level on both regional and national level to the legislation. So we need to make sure that it's all incorporated and it's written down, and we don't need to wait for the day after when we will only start incorporating in our pieces of law, but they need to make sure that it's guaranteed and it's already there. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And for those of you in the audience who have heard of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which was passed in the Security Council 24 years ago, this is what it's talking about. This is the kind of preparation and the direction of a society in the day after. Your voice, your respect, and dignity in all decisions about peace. Thank you for that articulation. Angelica, please talk to us about, we've seen a strong side of war, but there is also the very vulnerable. How are you working for and with the very vulnerable for this day after? How can we help to prepare the many in Ukraine who have experienced unbelievable tragedy and trauma?
Thank you for your question. First of all, the war lighted and highlighted and amplified vulnerability of already vulnerable groups. And one of them, it is Roma community, with which I'm working and my organization working. And as I said before, I returned to Ukraine in September 2022. And I started to build regional offices in different regions of Ukraine. It is, of course, Frontline. It is my hometown, Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk region, Kharkiv region, and Zakarpattia region, where the largest Roma community is currently living. So we are helping with humanitarian aid, that is, and cash assistance and different types of food kits, hygiene kits, etc. We are working on economical empowerment of women, and it was the first priority of my organization, Voice of Romni, since 2020. And it has become a new sense of this program, because a lot of IDP women started to live, for example, in regions that is really different from their hometown. For example, in Zakarpattia, where there is no factories, as an industrial city in Kharkiv. And we started to help them with requalification, retraining courses, obtaining specialities. We are providing also business grants, starter kits to fast practice in new specialities. We are working also on preschool and out-of-school education of children, because and also providing psychological consultations, because the trauma for the children, for all of us, is really awful. Trauma of war, and a lot of children are coming to our spaces for children with social adaptation problems, with symptoms of PTSD, self-harm, because they can't get rid and can't deal with this trauma, and we are helping them with that. And last but not least, we are also working on advocacy and leadership, because in my opinion, so our work is also aimed on investing in Romani women leadership. The Roma community is often overlooked, so I'm working for investments in leadership, especially for local women's organizations and initiative groups, to strengthen them, to give them the necessary knowledges to develop their skills and grant rating and etc. to help them to become a leader, because it is really very challenging for local ones, for the marginalized groups, but also in times of war. And it is important for me to strengthen their voices on various levels, including international, so that the needs of Roma women will be included in regional plans, in early recovery plans, in humanitarian response. And the most important things, it is to point that we want not only to be heard, but we want to be in the decision-making processes. And what I'm working for, and for these almost 3 years, my organization helped 100,000 people from vulnerable groups, and last year in 2023 it was almost 44,000 people whom we helped with different types of services and aid. And I think that it is not enough. But the main thing that, yes, we have to fight again and again to be heard and to participate in advocacy, important advocacy meetings on different levels.
Thank you so much for really bringing forward the impact of war on children and the most vulnerable. It is dignity at its heart, and your work is especially important. I'm going to end this round of the panel before we have our guest visitor and then Q&A, so I hope you all have great questions. Mary, as you listen to our colleagues here from Ukraine and who you have been in other conflicts in this region, what kind of perspective for the day after can you add? What lessons learned have you seen that have worked? And how do you see this next path ahead? Not an easy question.
Right. Because I was thinking about other conflicts in the region, and I'm not sure I've seen a lot of day after, unfortunately, in conflicts in the former Soviet Union. I did serve in Kosovo, and we did have a day after there, fortunately. And I think that what we're talking about here, these are the things that need to be done for the day after. I think they've already identified them. It's making sure that vulnerable people are taken care of, making sure that women and other people who play a key role in the victory also play a key role in the decision-making after, and making sure that all of the trauma and things that society undoubtedly is experiencing, that those are addressed. It's going to take work, it's going to take time, and you're absolutely right, it's going to take everyone in society, men and women. So I think that they've done an outstanding job of laying out what's going to be necessary for the day after. And that is what we're trying to work on. You mentioned education. That's one of the things that USIP can actually offer, is we do have expertise in areas like dialogue, community dialogues, things like that help address this conflict and this trauma. And that's what we're bringing to the table. That's what we're bringing to support you as you do that work. And so I think that these Ukrainians have definitely shown us they know what needs to be done for the day after. They know what help they need, and they can identify it, and basically we should stand ready to help them.
So well said. And we do stand ready to help. We're going to shift for a moment. We have a visitor actually from the University of Minnesota who's joining us now online. Professor Fionnuala Ní Allen is a University Regents Professor, holder of the Rabina Chair in Law, Public Policy and Society, and the Faculty Director of the Human Rights Center at the Law School at the University of Minnesota. Among her many accolades, I will just note that in 2024, the professor was appointed Honorary King's Counsel by His Majesty, the King of England. She comes from us, from Queen's University of Belfast, and I've asked her if she would not reflect on the situation in Northern Ireland and the day after as a point of comparison, a point of wisdom, I hope, and a point of understanding. Fionnuala, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. And it's such an honor to be with these phenomenal women, and a real pleasure to hear them speak. So I guess I'd start by saying that the day after is a really long day, and we can't think of it as a singular, because as we've learned in Northern Ireland, actually the after of conflict stretches for decades, and we, 30 years after our own peace agreement, are still in the day after, and women are still struggling for equity, equality, inclusion, and meaningful participation in all parts of our ongoing peace process. I think it's also worth saying Northern Ireland, and I think USIP, who's been so deeply engaged with so many of my colleagues and friends in Belfast over the many years since we passed our agreement, Northern Ireland is often seen as the best case scenario, meaning we see it as a kind of a gold chip standard on what women can achieve in engagement in a peace process. But I think what that misses is actually the limitations of the Northern Ireland peace process, and actually what we learned about what was so limiting about current paradigms of inclusion for women in both preparing for the end of conflict and the end of conflict through negotiation itself. So it's through decades of trial and error that we got to a Good Friday peace agreement. And along the way, there were several, you might call it slow learner attempts to try to get to that agreement. And women weren't included in any of them meaningfully. So actually the point of the big framework agreement, the track one agreement that has a good day outcome, is actually hiding the decades when women were left out. And what I would say for Ukraine is we don't want 20 years of trying to get to an agreement where women are left out and then maybe one day we get them all to the table as they should be. And the other thing we've learned is that actually while so much attention is paid to the track one agreements and getting women to that table, which has been, just to say clearly, profoundly latent and unsuccessful across the globe, whether it's in Afghanistan, Sudan, we could think of multiple examples, Yemen, where women are just simply not at the table, no matter what Security Council resolutions we have. But I would say to the women of Ukraine too, as Irina and I and so many others have discussed, what we actually need to pay attention to is all the spaces of preparation for the day after and asking the woman question, which is where are the women in those spaces? And that doesn't mean we take our eye off the ball of the big moment, the track one negotiation, but it's recognizing that all these other processes play into setting the framework for track one. And if you only get to show up on the day where the track one negotiation starts, the deal is already significantly hard-baked, and women's lack of inclusion means they haven't been part of the process of setting it out. But what did Northern Ireland have that I think also mirrors what we see in Ukraine? We had an active, visible women's sector. Women were essential for us to come through our conflict. They were the heartbeat of civil society. They were what held communities together. They were the people arguing for peace the whole way through. The second thing we had, and I think this is really a clarion call to women in Ukraine, is we had the ability to mobilize those women quickly and effectively to get them in when the door opened very slightly on track one negotiations and ensure that they could in fact be ready to jump in. And I think what we have also seen is actually a willingness to support those women. And that's where the language and the work that USIP and so many others are doing is essential. Because as all of us who've been parts of peace negotiations in the room know, you can't just show up in the day and be ready to negotiate. Negotiation requires preparation, and it requires facilitation and training and capacity building for women to be ready to do the work they want to do. But let me also issue some cautions based on our own experience. We did have women at the table, extraordinary women. But it turned out that we still got an agreement that was impoverished on women's rights. There were no formal rights for women included in the agreement. We had no institutionalized pathways or benchmarking on women's inclusion. We got a vague reference to women's participation in public affairs. And socioeconomic rights were deeply marginalized in our peace process, with demilitarization and things like policing, the kind of masculinities of conflict ending, dominating the track one agreement. And the result of that at the end of our conflict was that we ended up with probably one of the most restrictive abortion and reproductive rights regimes in Europe for many years in Northern Ireland, through the complementary patriarchies of the men who negotiated and then ran the agreement. And we ended up with a loss of women in public life. So despite that massive inclusion of women in the peace agreement, we actually, in the subsequent elections, saw the elevation of ethnic tribalism, ethnic elites. The Women's Coalition was disbanded. Women struggled to find space in a post-conflict game that was about letting men run things. So what do those lessons give to Ukraine? What they give us is that women, civil society must be ready. And we see the readiness here. But actually, it's ready at a level that you can make an impact. And I think really thinking seriously and strategically about how to do that at every point of discussion from now on is really critical. The second is we have to give training and support to those women to be ready, not just on the day, but in the aftermath. There's a ton of funding for women up to the day of negotiation, but the day after, when the deal is signed on the White House lawn, turns out that all the funding for women's organizations tends to go away. And Ukrainian women will need our support for as many decades as women in Northern Ireland have needed support to maintain our presence in an ongoing peace process. And I underscore this point about inclusion. The demand for radical inclusion is not just in track one, but it's in every single molecule of discussion around the day after, from the civil to the political to the economic to the social. Centralizing women in all of that work has to be done. And this means that women, including Ukrainian women, have to ask really uncomfortable questions, not just of the other side, but of their own government. Meaning it's very difficult in the context of war to ask your government, what are you doing for us? Where are women in this picture? Sacrifice is expected and given, but frequently the hard questions about misogyny, equality, gender violence, gender inclusion, those can't be asked the day after the peace agreement. They have to be asked consistently from now. And that involves asking really uncomfortable questions in a time of war, and that puts enormous burdens on women. And finally, I would say the international community has to mean what it says about women, peace, and security, including in Ukraine. We're going to have the 25th anniversary of the WPS agenda this October, and I expect, like every other year, we'll have a parade of states standing up saying, breaking all records, saying how much they care about WPS. But frankly, their words mean very little in practice, because we're not seeing women in track one agreements. We're not seeing the radical inclusion of women across the board in all of the efforts around ceasefires, humanitarian action, in preparing for the end of conflict. Women are not there. And so we have to get past platitudes on WPS. And in some sense, Ukraine, given the importance of this conflict, is the test case on whether we mean what we say about WPS.
Thank you so much, Fionnuala. I'm hanging on every word, and I hope you'll stay with us for a few more minutes as we go to our audience here at USIP for questions. And as many of you know, when I moderate, I usually take about 3 or 4 questions because I really want to hear your voices as well as the voices here. So I'm going to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and Nuria, it's right here. If you could just raise your hand, and if you wouldn't mind standing and introducing yourself and keep your remark very brief.
Sure. Thank you so much, Margarita Tadevos. From George Mason University. I thank you for sharing the personal stories. That's really important for us to hear and sympathize and know the path you are walking. I have 2 short questions. One is that in Washington we have somewhat the privilege of hearing your stories, but I wonder, and we're less privileged to hear the stories of women who are left on the other side, and I wonder if you have any idea, any contact, any knowledge of what they are engaged in and what they're doing, like in Lugansk, Donetsk, and other regions that are under occupation. And the second question, what can we do very specifically from here to support the work that you are doing and to support not the day after, but today? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right behind you.
Greetings, my name is Kim Weichel. So I first just want to say how much I admire your courage, your dedication, your commitment over these past several years and all that it's going to take to rebuild in Ukraine. We deeply care. I just want to convey that message. My question really follows on what was already asked, which is how do we as NGOs, how do we as Americans support what each of you are doing, but importantly, to ensure that women's voices and rights are fully included? What can we do to support you?
Marvelous, thank you. Right behind you, thank you, Kim.
Thank you. My name is Anastasia Preverteny. I'm with Razum for Ukraine. Thank you for your incredible work and for the panel. Irina briefly mentioned the importance of changing the narrative. What are the misconceptions that you've encountered in your work here about Ukraine or about women's movements in Ukraine, and how is this narrative ought to be changed? What are the new narratives that we have to be spreading to encourage support for Ukrainian women? Thank you.
Thank you, and right here toward the front, gentlemen.
Hello, my name is Paul Thorn-Kazai, and I also want to echo appreciation for you all being here and for presenting and sharing your stories and all the work that you're doing. I know you appreciate it much more, but we also see and are grateful. I wanted to ask, our recent speaker mentioned some of the difficult questions that need to be asked before peace is established and before the day after. So I wanted to ask, what are some of the difficult questions that you are asking, whether it's addressing vulnerable communities, also advocating for women's voices in the peace process, and what kind of pushback is there as far as, no, this is not the time, or let's do that later? What are some of those conversations and the work that has been going on?
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to turn back now to our panelists and Fionnuala, and I'm just going to, for the sake of simplicity, ask you to make comments on whatever one of these questions. Keep them brief. And Fionnuala, I'm going to end with your comments. So, Anna?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for your questions. Maybe I will start with the very first one, because this is exactly what our organization is doing. Just we are amplifying the voices of those women who could not possibly join us today for this international discussion, but we are making sure that their voice is heard both internally in our country, and we are trying to reach out a broader audience as well. So every year we are holding a big event, which is called also Ukrainian Women Congress, and this year we will have 8 already. It's going to be in November, but basically what we are trying to do, we are trying to give an equal representation of women coming from different regions, also from those you mentioned on the eastern part of Ukraine who are closer to the front lines or were occupied, but also from the western, south, central, north, because all these regions, they're having different types of problems, and we are definitely hearing these stories, and I would be happy to link you to all of these people if you're interested in some particular or in general. That would be great to connect and exchange this.
Thank you, Anna. Perfect.
I will take 2 questions. First, about the narrative, but very short answer. So what we have already changed, but that was like a little bit, women are not victims of the war. Women are active defenders in broader meaning. And that's, and also another narrative that also echoes with the last question. It is not too early to speak about women's needs, women's rights, women's meaningful participation. We should talk about right now. And the second question that I will take, what you can do for us. Actually, whatever you can. If you have the platform at the university, the conference, invite Ukrainian women. We will tell our story. If you have the fellowship in your university, just invite Ukrainian woman, and she will make the research and will bring the knowledge back home. If you have the chance to make the photo exhibition to tell the story about the war, just put this exhibition wherever you are working. Any creative opportunities work for us, and we stand ready to be a partner to make it happen wherever, whenever, and as long as it takes.
Thank you, Irina. Absolutely.
Thank you all for your questions. I will take one question regarding the problems and challenges from you, and regarding what you can do for us. So first of all, I will, of course, talk about Roma women and Roma community in Ukraine. And for us, it is very challenging to explain again and again the context of Roma community, to explain to each partner that Roma community is not homogeneous, the specific of Roma community, that for example, in western part of Ukraine, Roma people are living in compact settlements without heating, without gas, and in really vulnerable situation. But western part of Ukraine, it is not in the priorities of main majority of our partners. And we have to ask again and again about humanitarian response in these regions, but of course we are working mostly in frontline territories, and this is the fact that people need help in these territories. But partners should understand the contexts of different vulnerable groups and to speak broadly, to research that, to be interested in that, because it is their aim to help the vulnerable groups. And the next one, regarding your help, I will also say that you can everything that you can do, and you have 3 contacts, and everything that you will need, every help in advocacy events for women from Ukraine, it would be great, and we will support, and we will looking forward to your emails and for work together.
Thanks, Angelica. Absolutely. Mary.
I really can't improve upon the outstanding answers that have already been given. I just would like to echo the appreciation for how much I've learned just sitting here listening to the 3 of you talk. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Fionnuala, you have the last word in this event today. Please.
So I really want to echo Irina's words, which is really the start of nothing about us without us, so that Ukrainian women in every conversation. And of course, it's super extraordinary to see a group of such talented and articulate Ukrainian women in an all-female space. But what I do want to see, and where we should all be wanting to see Ukrainian women speaking, is at NATO conferences, at security conferences around Ukraine, in Security Council briefings on Ukraine. We have to be in the places where decisions are being made about security and comprehensive solutions to the conference, not only in the spaces where women mostly and often talk to other women about what they see in the conflict. I think the second thing I would really underscore is the obligation of the international community, and here I would underline the obligation of the United States, and it has been committed, this administration, President Biden and his team have been in the State Department, have been very committed to the WPS agenda. But it's really important that that's not just the fringe, the decorative edge at the end of the table. It has to be women centrally in all of the discussions. And it's almost, I feel like we need a gender report card on how we are doing on Ukrainian women's inclusion in all aspects of discussions on, about, and the end of the conflict. And that starts now.
And that does start now. So beautifully said, and such a great challenge for us all. I want to thank our audience online and here in the room. I hope you'll take a moment now to remember what I guess Shakespeare said in Hamlet: the preparation is all. And these women today are making it their all. And I hope you will join us in welcoming and thanking them again for their work.